Welcome to What's Wrong with Richard Rushfield. Today, with my guest, the distinguished producer Brad Simpson. Got an actual introduction written for you today, which is a rare honor
Great.
here on this fly by night show. So, over the past 30 years, producer Brad Simpson has been involved in a startling number of the most interesting projects of his era. As an executive and producer, his credits include some of the indie greats of our days, including Far From Heaven, Party Monster, Boys Don't Cry, Hedwig and the Angry Inch, Happiness in 1 Hour Photos, as well as major tentpoles including World War Z and Diary of a Wimpy Kid. Teamed up with Nina Jacobson and Color Force, they have overseen a brilliant slate of projects for the big screen and small, including Crazy Rich Asians, People versus O.J. Simpson, Assassination of Gianni Versace, Pose, and Love Story. His latest project, which he's here to talk about today, is The Shards, a series for FX based on the quasi-autobiographical. Is quasi-autobiographical the correct term for
It is the correct term, or for possibly autobiographical or autofiction. I don't know what's the correct term. Yes.
Very autobiographical in places, I guess, is the way.
Brett says none of it's autobiographical, so who knows?
Oh, no. Despite the fact that the protagonist is named Brett Easton Ellis, none of it. It's The Shards. It's set in Los Angeles in the 1980s. I'll read the official description. Against the vivid backdrop of 1980s Los Angeles, the series follows a group of privileged high school seniors in elite prep school as they navigate identity, sex, jealousy, obsession, and the dangers lurking beneath the surface of American adolescence. A great pitch there. So let's start at the beginning. How did you get involved in the Brett Easton Ellis is one of the most interesting writers and commentators today, and was thrilled about this novel, and one of the best evocations of LA in the 1980s I've ever read, certainly. And how did you get involved with it, and how did you think that this genre bending piece could be brought could be turned into a series?
Well, first of all, Brett is a seminal figure for me. I love all his works, but Less Than Zero I read as a teenager in Arkansas. Instead of reading it as a cautionary tale, I read it as something to aspire to. I was jealous of these parentless kids in Los Angeles amidst all this wealth, and and when American Psycho came out, it was also a significant moment. I mean, people don't know this now that's part of the canon, but it was a polarizing book. People treated it like this bad object, and now it's become something that's celebrated and has influenced so many filmmakers and so many authors. I think he has one of the distinct.
It's hard to even imagine any book getting people as worked up as that, sparking the conversation that sparked in those days.
No, angry publishers dropping, and the people coming out in force against a book. I wish we had things that would polarize in that way. We're back in that day when we all were talking about the same thing.
So when we ended, so how he wrote this book, he wrote it on his serially, and read the chapters on his podcast as they went.
Something you could be doing right now. Yes, he wrote the book as a podcast, and it came out serially, on his podcast. And as a producer, we missed it, and I was consumed with jealousy when the book came out. I did not realize he'd been writing on his podcast, and HBO had swooped in and optioned it. And the book came out, and I read it, and I had the worst feeling you can feel as a producer, which is I missed it. And then there's this idea of producer, you want to get in early, you want to get the thing, and you want other people to be jealous of the material you have. And we watched and waited. It didn't move forward at HBO, and FX had been tracking it for Ryan, and they brought it to Ryan and said, look, this isn't getting made at HBO. Are you interested in this? He got them to, pay the reversion rights. And then my company, Color Force, with Nina Jacobson, we work, on a lot of Ryan stuff. We just finished Love Story, and Ryan invited us along to dramaturg and be part of it. And it was, a great call to get, because I was not going to be faced with not just being jealous that it was getting made, but being jealous it was getting made by my friends without me.
Yeah, that is perfect. What? So was it the setting or the story or the what was it about it that that demanded to be on the screen to you?
Well, I'm obsessed with, I'm a child of the 80s, so I'm obsessed with this moment in early 80s LA, and it's so much of what Brett does well. It's a book that, in the book, there are a group of seniors, people who are starting their senior year. They've all been good friends. They all are children of privilege and children of Hollywood. And it's this moment in Los Angeles, which really existed, where there were just a ton of serial killers. It was like the golden age of serial killers. There was the Hillside Stranger, the Night Stalker, and it was just sort of accepted that you had to go to bed at night living in fear that a serial killer might come into your bedroom and kill you. And Brett merged the two into a book. So these kids are starting their senior year. A killer named the Trawler is stalking young women in Los Angeles, and a new kid shows up. A new kid named Robert Mallory with a mysterious past. And Brett, who is our narrator, is the author, but also the narrator and the main character, starts to suspect that this Robert Mallory may not be the kid he says he is. I think it's a great premise for a show, and it's still set very much in that American Gigolo-styled moment of SL convertible Mercedes and licorice pizza records and drive moments where you get with your friends in a car and nobody's listening to a podcast. They're just putting on a new wave synthesizer sound. And this era where people were disconnected, where you would leave as a kid at 5 o'clock or at 3 o'clock and your parents just didn't know where you were all day and all night. It was
free range childhood.
Great. Yes. Free range childhood, not the helicopter thing. And, we just experienced on Love Story about John F. Kennedy. People had nostalgia for the 90s who were there, but a lot of people who weren't alive then had a false nostalgia for that 1990s and how people weren't on apps and, they got to meet each other face to face. And I have that same nostalgia for the 1980s of what it meant to be a kid during that time.
What? And I was a kid. I grew up in LA. I'm about 4 years younger than Brett. And when Less Than Zero came out, it was, the one writer I can say made me a writer was Bret Easton Ellis, because it's
amazing.
This was the first time that I saw literature that resembled anything I knew in the world. That it wasn't some remote, and I think we memorized that book when it came out. But there's something about LA in that period that it is so cool and so otherworldly. It's like it is almost like the reality of it is almost like an AI recreation or something, because it has this cool to it, but somehow this distance from the emotionalness of it that lends itself to serial killers running amok. Whatever. What does that period mean to you?
You lived it. I was a kid in Arkansas, experiencing it through movies, and there were so many great movies about Los Angeles, whether it was Michael Mann making movies or Less Than Zero, the movie itself, or again, I'll reference American Gigolo, which is a very specific Los Angeles. And LA, loomed large in the American psyche. I think this was LA coming back. We were leading up eventually to the 1984 Los Angeles Olympics. And the idea of LA as being sort of the future of America, but it was also this city of constant sun and serial killers operate against it, of, teenagers who were like in this endless summer, but also, exposed to Hollywood and the dark side. I don't know, it was a mythical place for somebody like me. And I was so jealous of kids like you. And what's incredible about Brett is he wrote Less Than Zero when he was just in college, which must have been a huge inspiration to you also.
Oh, absolutely. That was when it came out, sorry, not to monopolize it myself, but when it came out, we actually, friends and I we followed the steps of all the places that were mentioned there and the characters, and it was incredibly inspirational book. But capturing that era, what was it like rebuilding LA in the 80s? How did
It's interesting. We just shot Love Story in New York, and it was really hard to recreate 90s New York because New York has changed so much. There's bike lanes. Soho is filled with these tall steel buildings. New York looks really different. So it was a real struggle. Recreating LA of that time, except for the fact that the malls look different, wasn't that hard.
Oh, really?
LA is a little bit stuck in time, and maybe that's because there hasn't been a reinvestment in infrastructure or Prop 13. I'm not deep enough to understand exactly why LA hasn't changed as much, but we still have those strip malls. We still have those ranch houses in the hills. The PCH looks like the PCH. Sadly, Licorice Pizza is gone in some of those places. But it was really not that hard for us to go find houses that were untouched and shoot in, but also to have blocks and blocks of storefront, especially in the Valley, that still look like Los Angeles. You can squint your eyes and you still can see the LA of the 1980s in the same way that Tarantino was able to squint and see the LA of the 1970s. There's something that hasn't changed. We did have to recreate Hamburger Hamlet because a lot of the show is set there, and sadly the Hamburger Hamlets are gone. So we've got those big banquettes, and I know kids who grew up in LA.
That Hamlet was a
school there or family dinners.
Yeah, the lobster bisque from the Hamburger Hamlet. If someone could resurrect that would be a great service to mankind. Who are casting it? What do you look for in people who can play the 80s? Who are people can? Because it's definitely like its own sort of visual stylistic vocabulary with the people and all that. What?
We didn't have it. We had a huge problem on Love Story last year where we couldn't find, all those sort of like Tom Selleck, Richard Gere, burly 80s men seem to be gone. We talked extensively about how we couldn't find an actor with chest hair or who didn't have like a trimmed down beach body. And we almost had to shut down production until we found Paul Kelly to play JFK Jr. because it's like they've stopped making those men as actors. This was easier because these were teens and not full-grown adults. But what we did, and which we done in Love Stories, we did classic casting call. People really do a lot of stuff via Zoom these days, and you don't get the same effects. So we went first to taped auditions, but then we brought people in, and Ryan personally auditioned actors, and then we did a big mix and match in LA. We brought a bunch of actors we loved out, and we would read them together, and we would have them play different parts. And somebody would come in for maybe one part, but then we'd focus them towards somebody else. Our two Robert and Brett are played by Igby and Homer Gere, and they, once we saw them match together, Homer plays a sort of Ripley-esque character, the new kid who, you can either read him as being nefarious and possibly a killer, or just a kid who's had some trouble and is trying to find his way in LA. And Homer just had this enigmatic quality. He has, these eyes that are so penetrating. Igby had the voice. He had this weird ability to look young, but also have that monotone, wiser than his years, Bret Easton Ellis look. But with some of them, with our guy who plays Tom, who's the captain of the football team, we gave him a Spicoli surfer redo and reimagined him as more of like a California surf football player with a frizzy blonde hair. We weren't looking for people who looked like the 80s, but we were looking for people who we could turn into the 80s archetypes. We have a girl, Debbie, who's just as platinum blonde as Blondie was during that time.
Does everybody start doing their performances sneering? Is the sneer like the way into doing the 80s?
We do have the sneer. We do. I think there's a lot of sort of ironic distance still in the 80s. Like the 90s were the peak of irony, but these are kids who are acting like adults. It really is this moment in the 80s where all the kids are laid back and wise beyond their years and sort of acting like adults, even though they're not quite adults yet.
Yeah. My school, by the way, had a smoking section. This was always amazing. It had a smoking section, but you had to get a permission. Your parents assigned a permission slip for you to use the smoking section. Which
we had a smoking section too, but that's brilliant that you had to go the extra level, and your parents might be like, "Yeah, you can smoke."
Of course.
What school did you go to?
Crossroads in Santa Monica there.
Oh, there you go. Well,
yeah.
This is very much, this world is very LA private school. So we're not saying what school it is for the show, but it's very much in that milieu.
Brett went to Buckley, we can say.
Yes, he did.
I believe is well established. You have been involved in so many interesting stories that sort of start with real life or based on that where the I mean, some like Love Story, like The People versus O.J. Simpson, which is, anybody who hasn't seen it, the greatest miniseries of the last modern era is.
I really appreciate. I love that, and it also is very much an LA story, also.
And so, what do you look for in these stories that sort of tell? They all sort of the Shards and People versus OJ and Love Story. They all sort of tell the story of their time and place and all that. What do you look for, and how do you get
I'm going to use a
involved?
weird analogy. I grew up loving in Arkansas, loving movies and TV shows, but I also was a magazine freak. And I subscribed there to Spy Magazine and Tina Brown's Vanity Fair and all of those things. And I loved how those magazines would have long articles like about Klaus von Bülow or something that would be page turners, but also tell you something about the culture in that time. And I really feel like as a producer, I produce it as if I'm producing my own magazine, that's about a trend or a style or a subculture. So, I look at it as I'm editing a magazine where I would have maybe article about the trans ballroom scene uptown in New York, and that's our series Pose, or The People versus O.J. Simpson about much this to me. The Shards fits into that as a story that you might see as a trend piece about serial killers and teenagers in Los Angeles in the early 80s. I like to produce stuff that I call literary pulp. I think Ryan does this too. I like a good poster. I wanted to drag you in. I want to have a propulsive narrative, but I want it to be about something deeper. And that's what, when we announced The People versus O.J. Simpson, the deadline comments under it were withering. We announced we were going to make People versus O.J. Simpson with Ryan Murphy, and people just insulted it and talked about, oh God, this is going to be a train wreck. It's going to be ridiculous. And we knew we were working on something that was going to be addictive, but also more serious. We wanted to surprise people because we really thought, no, this is a story about that it captivated America because it's about race and gender and celebrity culture. And I believe with that show kicked off the true crime trend, which may now have be exhausting its staying power. But I really, I know it's a weird metaphor, but I look at it as if like, okay, what would I want to pick up in a magazine and read on a plane going cross country the way you used to?
Well, it was as a series, it was a page turner. You were gripped by the story and the characters wanted to say it, but it also was like a very serious look at the time and the case, and as serious as anything you'd find. So you found the way to be kind of gripping and engrossing, but also serious and not exploitative in that. I can understand why
making that show, and with the Shards, I will say, has this thing. Brett never says this explicitly in the book, and he may disavow this as an interpretation, but Ryan has this interpretation. Brett and Ryan are both the same age. They came of age in the age of AIDS, like they were in their 20s when AIDS ravaged America. And the Shards, I don't think it's an accident that they're constantly exploring youth with the idea that there's this menace lurking outside behind them. And when you look at the Shards, you look at all these beautiful young actors and they're about to go out into the world. And in our story, it's a serial killer that's stalking. But really what we know during that time is the menace that was waiting out for a lot of people was this virus that was going to define the 80s also. And so I do think there's always a deeper read to everything, even if the Shards is not trying to be what People versus O.J. Simpson was. I mean, with the Shards, we're really going for like an entertainment. We really hope people sit down and it's, we want to captivate you first, and then hopefully you'll get more out of it as you watch.
How do you find when you're recreating the era? I mean, the 80s in particular are so jarring because you just like look at them and like, what the hell were these people wearing? And like, what they just talks of different every neon lights everywhere, and but at some point the music is so different, and but at some point, I mean, that's got to become the background and just sort of the water they swim in, and not just constantly shocking you with these crazy asymmetrical haircuts all the time.
Well, sometimes you can't do exact recreations. When we went to do OJ and we looked at the wardrobe that people were actually wearing during the 90s, during the trial, it looked like an SNL sketch. Like the men's suits for the trial were so comically big. It was like the David Byrne big suit from Stop Making Sense. So we actually had to pull back from that. With this, Brett's book is a memory of his childhood, of his time. And I think, and it's fused through movies. And so really, we weren't looking at this show as much at like, let's look at authentic pictures of the 80s, as much as we were watching movies, once again, like American Gigolo, stylized movies that were already like an idea of the 80s, an elevated idea. And we really tried to not have a lot of like, there's suddenly a Rubik's Cube in the middle of the shot or something that feels kitschy. We've got a couple shots of Reagan, but really we wanted it to be a mood piece, and, not an exact recreation, but an idea of that moment. Because yes, sometimes if you just recreate what people were looking like, it's comical. We do have a character named Steven, who's played by Jordan Roth, who is an artist in New York. And he's probably our biggest nod to a David Lynch character. I mean, he is dressed in a full New Wave outfit at every second. He's got Flock of Seagulls hair and, is deliberately presented as an outsider amongst this group.
No, it's interesting because any era, if it's set in 1980, if you lived in 1981, you didn't buy all your furniture on January 1st.
At the same time,
yes. You didn't, and you didn't buy all your clothes or your music or everything. So you're every moment is sort of a collection of the years preceding it. In a way, is interesting. What I'm interested. A couple last questions here. You had such an interesting career as an independent producer, and it kind of feels like the sort of stories that you would have made as independent films 20, 25 years ago are now more at home in TV for you. Do you feel that, or how do you feel straddling those two?
Yeah, I would say a couple things. I was lucky enough to enter independent film in 1995 during this great moment where there was massive output, many people distributing independent film, a vibrant culture for it. They were easy to get made. And I was lucky to have a great mentor in Christine Vachon, who I worked for 8 years and is the queen, not just of nuclear cinema, but also has produced 160 movies and is a legend, is getting a Thalberg this year. And Christine always had a belief that she just needed to make it for the right amount of money, but that interests that seemed marginal to some people, she could make mainstream. And she really practiced that in the independent space. And what's been exciting for me and exciting about working with Ryan Murphy on these series is that, he grew up in a similar way to her, watching John Waters movies, looking at Andy Warhol, looking at outsiders, and, really has decided, like, I'm going to take these ideas that are marginal and put them at the center of culture. And there still is, and he's done that incredibly well. He's get things programmed that if you went back and told me, 20 years ago, we would have been able to do a mainstream television show with an all trans cast set in the 1980s that dealt with AIDS as one of the themes, I would have said it's never going to happen. And for as much retrenchment as we've seen, Ryan has constantly pushed progress in the same way Christine has through culture, through media. And I really admire that. And I've tried to do that in my work in our own small ways, whether it's Crazy Rich Asians, where we had the first all Asian cast in a studio film, or in our work with Ryan Murphy, or in the Hunger Games series, dealing with themes of, repression and ideology, but also, casting, my partner Nina casting, a woman in a role that people said there was a reason Lionsgate ended with it, because the studio said boys just won't go see a movie with an action movie with a female protagonist. And so I've always been pushing that, but you are correct that there is a bunch of stuff that used to get made in movies that is much easier to get made in TV right now, as movies restricted. And I actually think there's been an opening up lately. A lot of the quote unquote adult drama that we used to see in the theater regularly, we now see on television. And I just think that's part of like to adapt Michael Crichton, like life finds a way. Like, I think these stories find a way, and they're going to continue to find a way to be told. And I've always been on the side of, if there's an interesting story and it's a page turner, if you make it for the right price, there will be an audience.
Well, thank you for keeping these stories and keeping the flame alive, and continuing to show that we tell interesting and important stories here. So appreciate you joining us. A great conversation. The show is the Shards, coming to FX. What is the? Sorry, I don't have the premiere date in front of me. What?
August 6th, I think.
August 6th,
I
coming
right.
up.
August 5th. Everyone's screaming at me. August 5th.
August 5th, next week.
It'll be on FX and Hulu. Let's go.
Fantastic talking with you. Can't wait to see it. And everybody, go back and watch The People versus OJ if you haven't seen it.
Thank you. Please do. It's also on the platform. Thank you very much.
Take care, Brett. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.